We have the right to self-government, to self-determination of land. And the people that are here are going to go back and continue the struggle. This is not an end, it's only a beginning.
Thanks for joining us on our podcast, The True Canadians. From the book by the same name, I'm David Wylynko, the co-author. Patricia Russell is my co-author on the book. And as part of the podcast series, we are today honored to be joined by Lorne Gladu, the founding CEO of Rupertsland Institute, which is the education arm of the Métis in Alberta. Lorne will more eloquently elaborate on what it's called better than I have. But we're at the Rupertsland office in Edmonton, overlooking the North Saskatchewan River. And we're going to talk about the great things that have occurred for Métis youth as far as education goes that Lorne knows as well as anyone else. And as part of the proof of that, Lorne has been given honorary doctorates from universities in Alberta. And that was the basis for one of our vignettes on page 87 of the book called In the Name of Education. But before that, Lorne was once a child like us all. He shared with me before we started today the Métis Nation Governance Foundational Knowledge Resource, book 1 of 5, which has also been put together all as one big book. And in it, there's an excerpt, a quote from Lorne, where he talks about playing as a child at the home of his maternal great-grandparents. And Lorne, in here, you actually say that even back then, you found yourself inspired all those years ago in a way that would perhaps lead to you doing the work that you've now done and are doing. How did that come about? How could you know at such a young age? I think it had something to do with the atmosphere of where you grew up. So maybe you could share some of that with us, and then we can move on to talking more about the Institute.
Well, thank you, David. Thanks for the invitation to say a few words about my involvement with the Métis Nation at Rupertsland Institute. Yes, it was a very humble beginning indeed, going back to the late 1950s and early 1960s when I grew up essentially in a one-room shack with a pot-bellied stove in the wintertime, essentially living off the land with my great-grandparents who were illiterate people. They did not speak English. They spoke 5 other languages, including Michif, and of course Cree, and French, and Sodal, and Ojibwe. Often those languages were mixed, and their vocabulary when they spoke to me as a child. And when I started school in grade 1, I spoke very little English. I think that inspired me to not only try to learn to grasp the English language, but also to move on from there to schooling beyond grade 9, because our community at that time had an elementary school that took you up to grade 9. And if you wanted to pursue any higher schooling, well, you'd have to leave the community and go on room and board to outlying community. In my case, I went to Heinsberg School, which was about 20 miles away. I room and boarded a farm family there. And then from there, I went to St. Paul Regional High School, ultimately to Edmonton, and then back to Elk Point to finish grade 12.
It's a lot of traveling at that age to be leaving home, but you clearly were quite motivated.
Yes, I left home at the age of 13, I believe, starting off the grade 9, and then, of course, ultimately ending up going full circle, really going from a rural community to the city of Edmonton, then back to Elk Point to finish grade 12. Like a lot of Métis that we fund through Rupertsland Institute, a lot of our people, due to the lack of funding, don't pursue post-secondary education right out of high school. And it's mostly because they don't have the money to do so. And similarly, in my case, I had a couple of careers in between before I actually went back to school at the age of 36 to pursue some schooling in business and ultimately ending up with the Métis Nation of Alberta as an employee. So I think I was inspired to want to work in the area of education, largely because with my own experience, I didn't have a whole lot of financial support to pursue post-secondary study. In fact, our community back at Fishing Lake Métis Settlement, their funding was very limited in terms of resources to support any kind of post-secondary education. And I remember asking for some help when I was going into my 3rd year at university. And I didn't have the money, and they didn't have the money. I didn't apply for a student loan, and I had no choice but to quit my program at the university and go find a job. I ended up finding a job at Human Resources Development Canada. I met people there, including my mentor, who changed my life, essentially, because that individual took me on and wanted to teach me everything that he knew about the Aboriginal Labour Market Development Program which was a federal program that supported the devolution of labor market training to First Nation, Métis, and Inuit community. And as a result of that, I ended up working for the Métis Nation of Alberta in 1996. I came on board. That program was brand new. They essentially turned over the funding to the Métis Nation of Alberta and essentially said to them, here's your money, go and design and deliver some training programming. So for the Métis citizens in Alberta, and I did that, or we did that. It was quite a task. We had a very small unit that we started off working with and was labor market development unit at that time. And we essentially started from scratch. We didn't have a basic framework. We had nothing. So we were given a task to design a delivery structure, design some programs and services that the community could access. And it was very humble beginnings, I would like to think, but we've always had the intention that along the way, our objective would be to continuously improve the program. And I think we did that. And eventually, when we had delivered about 14 years of programming, we approached the Métis Nation Provincial Council to consider the idea of approving a Métis Centre of Excellence. And with a presentation that we did on February 26, 2010, the Provincial Council unanimously approved the idea of moving towards a Centre of Excellence. And eventually came along with the name, Rupertsland Institute, Métis Centre of Excellence, and that's where we started with our program in 2010. We carried on from there, of course. We had signed a brand new labor market development agreement. We had the mandate to provide labor market training for Métis citizens in the province. And as part of that, we also had negotiated the opportunity to provide final year funding for post-secondary education. In addition to that, we had negotiated a clause in our agreement. It was called Section 11. It was referred to as the Métis Clause in those days. That allowed us to create post-secondary endowments with post-secondary institutions as partners, with the view that we would set up endowments with a matching dollar with our post-secondary partners. We started doing that in 2008 with MacEwan University as our first partner in terms of creating endowment, and we simply moved on. Based on that experience, we moved on to other post-secondary institutions, including the U of A in Edmonton here, of course, and NAIT and Northwest College. Today, we have, I believe, 21 post-secondary endowments and a total portfolio that's moving towards $32 million in market value. Those post-secondary endowments have supported Métis students essentially since 2009. And of course, if we arrive at a 5% annual return from those endowments, well, we're moving towards about a $1.5 million total distribution across the province for Métis students. And this is over and above and separate from the support we're already providing under our labor market development program final year funding for college and university. It's a far cry today in terms of what we have for support when you compare it to what Métis citizens had in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, because during those years, Métis Nation and Métis citizens had no post-secondary funding that they could access in order to pursue a higher education. So for those of us who are looking back, it's a very enviable position to be in, considering where some of us started off, who, if you wanted to pursue a post-secondary education, you actually had to go and get a loan of some kind or have saved the money for it. And nowadays, if you're interested in pursuing a post-secondary education, you can certainly come to Rupertsland Institute along with our post-secondary education program that we now have in place. And you can actually receive support not only in the final year, but also in year 1, 2, and 3 of your educational pursuit. And of course, to top that off, we have the full final year support for individuals who are going into or finishing up their post-secondary requirement. And even beyond that, we also have support for those who are pursuing higher learning at the master's level and at the PhD level, at the professional designation as well. So it's quite a range. And with our endowments that are across the province, like I mentioned, there are 22 endowments. We also have 2 internal endowments under Métis Education Foundation. One of those 2 endowments supports students who are pursuing a musical or athletic designation either within or somewhere in the country or outside of the country. And if you are pursuing a special designation, let's say it's a professional study of some kind, and happens to be outside the country, well, we have this endowment that will actually provide some support for that endeavor. We know that our community has very talented musicians, and some of our people are actually very talented athletes. And quite often they don't have the financial support for them to pursue a career or a professional pursuit in that regard. They had historically didn't have a place to turn to, but now we have this program in place that actually supports individuals. I know of one person who was supported for a professional designation and is now a doctor of veterinary medicine, who was supported by this program as an example. So yes, it's very interesting with a wide range of financial support that we have for post-secondary students, including those who are not only studying in the province of Alberta, but also outside. We've had those who are studying in Eastern Canada, for example. And yeah, it's quite the accomplishment, I think, considering where we were a very few short years ago, because in 2008, for example, there were no post-secondary endowments at all that provided any kind of support.
The endowments, for the purposes of an individual, effectively become a scholarship, I guess. It's what, would that be the term from the student's perspective?
Yes, I suppose you can call it a scholarship. Well, by and large, according to terms and conditions with federal funding, we're quite limited at what we can call these levels of support. We're not allowed to call them bursaries, and we're not allowed to call them scholarships.
Oh, okay.
And hence the reason why we call them Métis Scholar Awards.
I see. Understood. So a lot of interesting things to come out of what you've said. I want to ask you about why it's called Rupertsland, and of course there's a huge history there that our listeners, the Canadians, may or may not be aware of. And I'd like to talk to you about, a scenario where we think of a 15-year-old Métis youth who wants to go on into post-secondary education, and what is it they're supposed to do? How do they access the program? How do they learn about it? Maybe they don't have the support at home to be going over, websites with a parent or whatnot. But before that, I'm curious about the history. You mentioned that, in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. Well, in fact, it was in the 1960s that in another one of our big nets in the book that we're looking at here on page 8, I talk about Stan Daniels, who was president of the Métis Nation. And there's an interesting quote that we put in the book where he stated, and this is actually accessible on as a video even today. He said, what we lack now is education. And this is in the 1960s. We're behind by a whole generation. Every effort is going to have to be made by every man, woman, and child to get educated, to get into the social and economic development of this country. Knowledge is the name of the game. And I think for a lot of people, a lot of Canadians, they don't understand that because they don't have to. They don't appreciate it because maybe they're in a family that's already driving them, and that's certainly the case today in the next generation. Driving them, there's just a blanket assumption amongst many middle class, upper middle class, and wealthy Canadians that you're going to go to university. The parents will map it out. They'll show up, they'll drive you there in September, they'll drop you off, they make sure you go to class now that we have this helicopter parent generation. But for the Métis then, and when you were young, and when Daniels was talking at that time, what a lot of people don't appreciate is that you kind of had lost a generation or more because of what happened in the history of the Métis. So I was hoping you could share with our listeners, especially those who are not of a Métis descent, a little bit about how important it was to get out of that sort of the road allowance people time that, even going back to the Battle of Batoche in 1885 that led all the way up to the 1950s, that how important it was for the Métis to start to get out of that environment so that they could back into or get into an environment like what Stan Daniels was talking about.
Absolutely. I noticed that you said that he claimed that we were one generation behind education. I would say it's probably more like two generations. So definitely, I can appreciate what it was like in the early 60s and the 70s and the 80s and so on. Coming onto the scene at the Métis Nation in the mid-1990s, the Labor Market Development Program, as I stated earlier, was a very interesting program to access, I guess, from the federal government, simply because the whole notion behind the program was to devolve that responsibility to Indigenous community. And the Métis Nation, up to that point, had not had any significant funding that had access to, whether it was from the federal, provincial level. So to be given not only the responsibility to design and deliver a program with such a huge amount of funding that came into the Métis Nation, that was an extraordinary opportunity. And we took that very seriously under the President Patra, who became the president in September of 1996, which was 4 months after I started in my employment at the Métis Nation. And very clearly, she made it known in the community that she wanted to pursue every opportunity for education for the people, and wanted to ensure that she supported our program to the extent that she became very involved with our program. Whenever we negotiated terms and conditions, she was always involved with us and supporting us at every level, whether it was through Métis National Council itself and the venue we had available to us through that mechanism, or whether it was a bilateral relationship with the federal government. So it became very important to President Patra and the Labor Market Development Unit to demonstrate to government, I suppose, that we could administer this program not only in terms of design and program delivery, but on the administrative financial side, to show the accountability, to show that we could meet the targets and annual results and move our people towards employment following their training intervention. So we were very successful in doing that. We became recognized for the work that we did. The department that funded us at that time was called Human Resource Development Canada, which evolved into Employment and Social Development Canada, would include us in national evaluations that were held, any kind of federal initiative that had to do with labor market development. They were always asking us to participate in those forums and those committees. That we were recognized for the database system we had developed, because it was all part of the accountability framework and demonstrating the results of our program.
We've been speaking with Lorne Gladu. Please join us on the other side. We're going to take a brief break.
Hello, this is Audrey Petra. Education has been the topic we have heard about all of our life for the Métis. For many years, I remember hearing, if our people could only be educated, everything would be better. That became something that we, as Provincial Council in 1996, when I was first elected, focused on finding ways of doing this. 6 months prior, while I was working as a Director of Finance at the Métis Nation of Alberta, we signed an agreement with Canada for training dollars to design and deliver programs for our people. So immediately upon our first council meeting, we passed a motion to say that education would become a priority. From there, we worked hard at what was called the Labor Market Development Unit within the Métis Nation of Alberta to start designing that. We set up employment centers across the province to be able to have our citizens really plan what their careers would be and how we would support them through that. That worked well in working out what worked, what didn't, until we finally got to a position where we believed we had the model that would work for us. And then we set up Rupertsland Institute, which was an arm's length institution that was clearly about education, training, and research. Rupertsland Institute has and continues to today of funding approximately 1,000 students a year, whether that's through trades, universities. And we have also set up funds through the Métis Education Foundation to have an endowment program that we would work towards signing with all the educational institutions in Alberta. We also set up an arm of Rupertsland Institute for Métis research and partnered with the University of Alberta to ensure that we had the research we needed when we were trying to access additional resources or programs from governments. Rupertsland Institute has gone on to create educational material that is now being used in our schools, is also being used in universities. Something that I am very proud of, because when people said for many, many years, education is the answer, Certainly, when we made that council motion to make education the priority, we weren't aware of all the different ideas that people had as to what education meant. But I think with setting up Rupertsland Institute, we were able to have a lot of those answers that people were looking for. And today, we can proudly say we have doctors, we have lawyers, we have tradespeople. We could probably find a Métis person educated in any of those sectors to be there to support the Métis Nation in the future.
We're back with Lorne Gladu, talking about education in Rupertsland, aspirations for the Métis, and how important education is. Lorne, why Rupertsland? How did something that maybe might have been thought of quite negatively in history of a huge swath of territory being allocated to what I think was the nephew of a king, and yet you've taken this name and made it your own and made it the name for the Métis educational arm. How did that come about?
Well, the name itself was suggested to me from one of our former staff, Gregory Humphrey. We had tossed around many ideas around the table, what we should call a Métis Center of Excellence. Our original objective in wanting to have a Center of Excellence was to be able to demonstrate that the Métis Nation can actually be accountable to its people and to government funders, that we can deliver a program that surpasses people's expectations to the point where you can demonstrate administrative distinction and operational excellence. And excellence, of course, is something that you never actually achieve. Excellence is something you actually pursue throughout your lifetime, hopefully. And in this case, as an organization, certainly that's been our objective since 2010. So when you consider the historical significance of the Métis and their contributions to the country and Canada becoming Canada and the contributions made by the Métis through the fur trade and the 200-year history behind the fur trade, I believe it was King Charles II that gave designation to his cousin or relative, Prince Rupert, to become the first governor of the Hudson Bay Territory, established in 1670. And to that extent, they called the territory Rupertsland with a possessive that shows that it belonged to the imperial power. Métis Nation, through the years, I believe, have removed the apostrophe and combined the two words into one and called it Rupertsland, of course. And then we felt that the name is there, has been there historically. The ethnogenesis of the Métis Nation came from within that territory. So why change it? We want people to know that before Canada became Canada, there was this Rupertsland territory, and the Métis Nation was a part of that history, and not only in the fur trade, but in working towards confederation with Riel and, Manitoba, ultimately joining confederation as a result of Riel's involvement in the politics at that time. So we wanted to acknowledge that history and maintain the history so Canadians come to know, because everyone always asks, what is this name? What is this Rupertsland territory? In fact, we had a meeting not long ago with educators that were put together by the Alberta government, and they wanted to meet with the Métis Nation leadership. And at the very start of the meeting, one of the senior leadership representing the Alberta government asked us, so where is this Rupertsland territory? Is that someplace in the north? So we had to go through the history and give them the history going back to 1670. So having said that, the youth of today, I think, have a great opportunity to pursue an education to the extent that we now have this thing called Rupertsland Métis Student Association. It's a requirement by Rupertsland Institute to have all Métis citizens who want to pursue education to join the Rupertsland Métis Student Association. And ultimately, even if you don't have membership with the Métis Nation, the RMSA is in place to help individuals and younger people to access membership at the Métis Nation. We have a very close working relationship with the Métis Nation Registry. And those individuals who not only are having challenges in accessing membership, we have an individual like Teresa Mazaran, for example, working with the RMSA and the youth who are wanting to pursue membership or citizenship at the Métis Nation. So this works very well into our funding because you have to have Métis citizenship in order to access Rupertsland services. So we provide a venue for that. And we encourage Métis citizens to enlist, to enroll their children, even at a very young age, into becoming members of the RMSA and even in junior high school. We have programs now that support students wanting to move beyond high school. We have this thing called Métis Access to Post-Secondary program, where we have Rupertsland representation in high schools, encouraging students to move beyond high school and showing them essentially how to get there. Once you are within reach of moving past grade 12 and wanting to move in the post-secondary environment, well, we certainly have the counseling support for that as well. And we would bring you into our program, into our system, where we have post-secondary education support for year 1, 2, 3, and 4 now. And then, of course, moving even beyond that to post-secondary, to graduate school at the master's level and at the PhD level. It's been quite a journey, considering that we started off with, in 1996, with nothing really. We were not aware in 1996 that there had been a conference held by the Métis Nation in 1990, from which we found a document that's now referred to as the Red Book. That Red Book and the recommendations in that Red Book had the aspirations of the Métis Nation to move towards post-secondary designation, post-secondary support, some kind of a institution that supported Métis endeavor in those areas. And we had no idea this paper even existed. We came across this paper about 5 years ago, and when we were reading it and looking at all the recommendations, we were very surprised to learn that Rupertsland Institute had actually achieved a lot of those recommendations in that book. So if you're referring back to the years of, not even going back, if you go to the museum, for example, that I went to at Duck Lake, where I saw
in Saskatchewan, north of Saskatchewan, beside Batoche, east of Batoche. Yeah,
there up on the wall there, it spoke about the value that Métis Nation placed, Riel and Dumont placed in education. So I actually took a picture of that. And then, of course, you fast forward 100 years later to 1969, where in the early 70s, when Stan Daniels was president at Métis Nation, and he spoke about the value of education and how his people needed to become educated. And you move forward another 20 years from that to mid-1990s, when we got access to federal labor market programming, where we argued successfully that we should be able to fund and support post-secondary education. And then you move into the 2000s and mid-2000s, 2005 and 6 and 7, when we ultimately started to support final year and college year education, and we established the Métis Education Foundation, where we established endowments to support post-secondary students. And then in 2019, we got the Métis Nation post-secondary education funding from the federal government. We added that to our portfolio. Now we actually can support students all the way from the early learning aspects, before students actually even move into grade 1 or kindergarten. And even within the K-12 system, we are now working very closely with our K-12 partners. We are affiliate members of the College of Alberta School Superintendents. We work with them not only with their annual conference, but we conduct presentations to the College of Alberta School Superintendents. We reach out to the Alberta School Board Association. We have conducted presentations about our foundational knowledge themes about the Métis Nation to at least 36 school districts so far. We have signed education services agreements with some of these school districts. And we work very closely with Indspire, by the way. with our national education gatherings.
Indspire, yeah. What is, elaborate just a bit on what that's about.
Indspire recognizes the achievement of Indigenous Canadians across the country in various aspects of their careers and achievements, and that kind of, whether it's athletic or musical or cultural, individuals are recognized for their achievement in those areas. So we are very close partners in Inspire. In fact, we are about to establish an endowment with Inspire in the coming months. Yeah, so we're quite involved in education in all aspects of it. I think that in many ways, our Métis community is not even aware of some of these things that are going on. Certainly our partners and stakeholders in the community are pleasantly surprised when we conduct presentations about what we do in education. I think the way of the future for the Métis is very promising, and I look forward to seeing more and more Métis graduate at the higher levels of education, and we're even moving the needle around the achievements where we have around Métis people becoming employed, because our current program, the Indigenous Skills Employment Training Program, has a target. It's a performance target where you measure the employment rate of Indigenous people when you compare them to mainstream. And we conduct labor market analysis and trends analysis around where, on a quarterly basis, by the way, on where we're at with respect to measuring where the progress of Métis citizens as they move towards employment and achieving employment in relation to mainstream employment. And at the start of this program, there was essentially a 10% gap that we were trying to achieve. And from 2019 to 2029, there was a 10% gap between mainstream Canadians arriving at employment and the Métis Nation was about 10 percentage points behind that. And we are halfway through this 10-year strategy. And the last time we conducted a labor market trends analysis, the Métis Nation was 6 points above mainstream.
Wow, about that. That's quite the indicator.
So you could say that I think that we achieved that target halfway through a 10-year strategy.
Okay.
That looks very promising for education.
That's remarkable. So it sounds as though, well, first of all, it's interesting. And a minute ago, you talked about, Riel even emphasizing education, and even Riel's dad was very well educated. And when I'm always struck by what it must have been like when Riel was, in negotiations or exchange of communications with the Prime Minister MacDonald. Meanwhile, in Ontario and in Ottawa, they were trying to portray the Métis, as savages and not educated, and so this was going to make sending the military easier as from a public relations point of view. Meanwhile, you've got this multilingual, educated individual sending letters and emissaries, and it really bookends this, education being and knowledge being a priority going back throughout the entire history of the Métis, and it's a fascinating aspect of the history that I think a lot of Canadians maybe aren't aware of. The history books instead wanted to emphasize other aspects of Louis Riel, and that's changing now, certainly as we've indicated in this book, and other historians like Margaret Conrad and so on. But what I wanted to touch on that you also mentioned a moment ago was about the youth coming into their ability to access the Rupertsland programming. You indicated, becoming a member of the Métis Nation of Alberta would that be the primary priority? Because from there you would then be getting notified about things, opportunities coming your way, or are there other things that young people should also be thinking about? I know there were these buses that would go out around the province and that would inform people about Rupertsland. Like what else besides becoming a member of the Métis Nation would a young Métis citizen do to make sure that they're well aware of where these opportunities are and how to access them?
Well, first of all, I like to say that the Métis Nation and its affiliates are an equal opportunity employer, and to that extent, if you take a look at the employees that work at the Métis Nation, we certainly have a wide representation of individuals who work here. But we're always very keen on attracting Métis citizens to come and work at the Métis Nation. In fact, we have challenges in trying to attract the right kind of talent to work in the various aspects of employment opportunities that we have. So we really want to encourage our youth who are in different pursuits to consider Métis Nation as your potential employer once you're finished your program. We're certainly at the higher levels of management now, and in the area of housing, for example, in the area of economic development, for example, in the area of children's services, and of course at Rupertsland in the area of not only employment counseling, but the upper levels of management. So there are many opportunities, and we always want to ensure that, that our citizens are aware of the employment opportunity, because I think a lot of individuals who pursue education, they want to move on to employment. Absolutely, they want to do that, but I always wonder if they consider that Métis Nation is a place where you can actually come and pursue an education. And many of us have been here for years. I've had a senior management team that worked with me for more than 25 years. So it is certainly a place where you can have a career, and we want to encourage that.
Excellent. So we'll finish by forcing you, you're so humble, to talk a bit more about yourself. And then with this one last question, I think it's useful for people to appreciate what someone, especially coming from the background that you mentioned off the top. I think you described it as a shack with a stove for the wintertime. The implication there being that that was your only source of heat, which most people today, especially in Canada, cannot appreciate. But you've gone from that to the achievements that we've discussed, mostly with the achievements that Rupertsland has been able to effect. But you've also received some pretty strong accolades from the community out beyond. Doctorate of Laws from Athabasca University, University of Alberta, as well as an Indspire Award for Outstanding Career Achievement. And the simple question is, what does that mean for someone, from your background and from where you've come and what you've done to be recognized that way in the outside academic community beyond Rupertsland and beyond the Métis community?
Well, in many ways, it's when I was approached by those institutions, including McEwen University, which is the most recent doctorate, by the way, I was beyond words. I didn't know what to say. Other than, of course, graciously accepting the invitation to accept these awards. I would have never guessed that this is where an opportunity to work at the Métis Nation would actually take me. So when I want to encourage youth to consider, employment opportunity in the Métis Nation, you never know what it's going to take you. And I certainly had no idea this is where I would end up in terms of being given that kind of recognition. So really appreciate that, of course. And when you receive an Indspire award, you're beyond words. You don't really know what to say other than, of course, to graciously accept it. 2 of those awards, by the way, were given during the pandemic, during a COVID lockdown. And unfortunately, I was not able to participate in the celebration that you would typically have in a large gathering. For example, when I was given the Athabasca University Doctor of Laws, they literally came to my house during the COVID pandemic, and we opened the front door, and they interviewed me through the front door of the house. And
How's
we
that?
captured that. And similarly, with the Indspire Award, they came to my home, and they brought their equipment into the house and that kind of thing. But we kept maintaining our distances. We were wearing masks and that kind of thing. But it was very interesting at the same time to try to create a video. It wasn't a very good quality video because of the circumstance, but nonetheless, we were able to capture, I think, the main points of what we wanted to do. So I was very happy about that.
We've been talking with Lorne Gladu, the founding CEO of Rupertsland, here at Edmonton at the Rupertsland office. We appreciate you taking the time to listen. Lorne, thank you for your time.
Thank you.